Tova, and welcome to a very special Rosh Hashanah Jewish New Year edition of a Dram and a Drash, my new podcast, where the water of life meets the tree of life. And today I have a special Rosh Hashanah whiskey cocktail for you. The Whiskey Smash has all of the ingredients we need for welcoming in a sweet new year. Apples, a little sweetness, and of course, because this is a dram and a drush, which is about everything whiskey and Jewish, we have our whiskey. So let me take you through what I have here, and we'll go through the steps of creating this cocktail. I'm going to begin with the smash part. We're going to be taking a few apple slices. Depending on whether you like your cocktail to be on the sweeter or on the slightly sour side, you might decide if you want a sweeter or a sharper apple. These are a little bit sharper because we're going to be adding a good amount of sweetness, and I kind of like that little bite. So I'm just throwing in here 3 apple slices, and with that I'm going to be muddling. Muddling is where you are getting out some of the essence of both the flavors as well as the smells that come with these ingredients that are going to get blended in with the alcohol. I'm going to take about half a dozen of these fresh mint leaves. These came straight from my garden, and they smell absolutely wonderful. Throw them in there. And when you're using a muddler, this is a one kind of muddler. It's just got an end that helps you really sort of get out the essence of those good things. Often it's good to throw in just a single cube of ice when you're doing this to really help mush it up a little bit, so that you're not just kind of playing around with the edges of the fruit. So I'm going to take a few seconds here to just really muddle those things in together. So as I press down on this with the muddler, I'm really starting to get a sense of those gorgeous smells and seeing it start to break down there, which is what we're looking for. Okay, now it's time to add the wet ingredients. So we're going to start with the whiskey. Now, what whiskey you put in a cocktail is very much a matter of personal choice. Or if we're being very practical, it might be a matter of what you happen to have at home. Oftentimes people think, oh, it's just a cocktail, I'll throw in something that's cheap and basic. But for a really good cocktail, you want a good whiskey. And a good whiskey does not have to be an expensive whiskey. I'm going to be showing you a couple of whiskeys here before I use one in particular. Both of these whiskeys are incredibly good value. I think they're very good quality. And they both happen to be bottled in bond. Now that's a very specific phrase, and I'll say more about that in a moment. But the thing about bottled in bond whiskies is that they are 100 proof, 50% alcohol. And I tend to like that in my cocktail because I'm going to be adding other flavors and non-alcoholic ingredients, and I kind of like that slightly stronger alcohol as my base. And they do make very, very good cocktails. Bottled in bond is a phrase that goes back to the earlier part of the 20th century, at a time when all kinds of people were bottling whiskey and putting things in that bottle that had very little to do with the distilled grains that were meant to be the essence of whiskey. They were diluting it with other things, some of which were actually quite harmful to human bodies. And so bonding came along as a way to say this warehouse, this whiskey has been government checked, and it is exactly what it says it is, and part of that quality control was it was always bottled at 100 proof. So I have here Evan Williams. Evan Williams is an incredibly delicious, smooth, easygoing bourbon. I like it in a great deal, and this is a particularly large bottle because it gets used as a base for a lot of things. I personally am, when it comes to cocktails, a big fan of rye whiskey. Rye whiskey is not everybody's cup of tea because it's a little bit spicier. If you like your whiskeys on the sweeter side, you're going to prefer a whiskey that's corn forward. Bourbon has to be at least 51% corn, but then probably has some rye and some other grains in it. And rye whiskey has to be at least 51% rye, but then may have other things in it as well. This is Rittenhouse rye, really wonderful product. Both of these whiskies, when you're buying this size bottle, you should be able to get in stores for between $15 and $20. They really are incredibly good value. So we're going to put in some of this whiskey. This recipe calls for a couple of ounces of whiskey. This is a 1 ounce pourer. So I'm going to be putting in 2 of those. It calls for an ounce of fresh apple cider, which I have here. So I'm going to be adding in 1 of those. And it calls for a cinnamon simple syrup or some other kind of sweetened addition. I say some other kind because I'm going to be using something else. Now, simple syrup is something you can make at home. You take equal parts sugar and water, and then you can add to that as you're heating it up whatever else you want to flavor that simple syrup with. So cinnamon would be a couple of cinnamon sticks, a couple of teaspoons of cinnamon powder, and you just let that kind of come to the boil and cook and then cool down, and then sit for a little while, and you'll have a wonderful cinnamon simple syrup. You can add different kinds of herbs and flavors for different kinds of simple syrups. You can also buy simple syrup in the store. Of course, this isn't infused. So if I was going to use this simple syrup, I'd want to warm it up gently, add the cinnamon in, and let it take on those flavors. But I actually have something else. And for those who are watching this locally from Westboro, where I am based, if you have been to the farmer's market, we've had a stand there every week called Ackerman's Maple Farm, and they have a cinnamon whiskey aged maple syrup. It is absolutely delicious, and that's what I'm going to be using for the sweetness in my whiskey smash today. So this is 1 ounce. That's why I like my apples to be a little on the sharper side, because this is quite a good amount of syrup going in. I actually put in slightly under the 1 ounce because, as I said, I don't like my cocktails to be too sweet. And then actually, just to counterbalance that sweetness, a whiskey smash, you add a little bit of lemon juice, just a splash. So I had freshly squeezed that earlier, and that goes in like so. So those are all of my ingredients. I have to add my ice. So we're going to fill this up about 3/4 the way with ice. I'm going to seal this well. Give it a good shake for about 10 seconds. And when you're shaking in a shaker like this with ice, you're doing 2 things. You're getting it really cold, but you're also adding a little bit of dilution to the alcohol that's in there, which also, when I start with 50% proof, that little bit of dilution, I'm not ending up with a really watery drink. And then the final touch here, we take a glass with crushed ice, we pour out our cocktail. And there it goes. And we're going to just finish it off with a little garnish, cinnamon stick. And I'm just going to take a little sprig of mint leaf and add that into the top there. And there we have it. Rosh Hashanah apple and cinnamon whiskey smash. L'chaim. Delicious. Shana Tova, everyone.